Have three speakers in the past few months, this being our third event, and we have a really great one today to end the series with. After we're done here, if you haven't had a chance to look around the museum, the two museums here in the main building, and down in the third one down in the barn, we hope you'll take the time to do that. At this point, I'll turn it over to our speaker, the one, the only, Abraham Lincoln. Welcome.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you today. My cabinet over here is working on some technology, and if it works, and I hope it does, you're going to see a wonderful movie video presentation of how Lincoln has portrayed me on a number of occasions. Technology, I love technology. You may not know, but I'm the only president with a patent. That's true. So I've always loved technology. I'm glad I have all these experts with me today. I'm going to cover some familiar ground with you today, I'm sure, but probably also maybe share a story or two that you're not familiar with. And of course, at the end, I'd love some questions and answers. I know that there's a bus tour here, and they're all leaving at 2 o'clock. You'll get the gist of it by 2 o'clock, so you'll have to, and I hope you get the chance to see this. Whenever I meet a group of this, I like this. I have to remember one of my trips on horseback when I was a young man living in Illinois, and I was riding to town on my horse. It was a narrow path, and I saw coming the other way was a woman on a horse, and to be polite, I pulled off to the side so she could go on by me. And I said, but as she went by, she stopped the horse. She looked at me and she said, "You know, you're the homeliest man I've ever seen in my life." And I said, "Well, ma'am, that may be true, but there's nothing I can do about it." And she said, "Well, you could have stood at home." I'm glad you didn't stay at home, and I'm glad I didn't stay at home. I never really had any illusions about my looks, but I stood about that day in town, and as I was going back home, same trail I had come in, guess who I saw coming down that same path was that woman. She was returning to town. So again, I pulled off to the side, and as she got closer, I said, "You know, you're with the meanest, orneriest critter I've ever seen in my life." And she stopped. She said, "How dare you insult my horse?" And I said, "Ma'am, I was talking to your horse." On another occasion, and if this movie works today, you're going to see a little bit of my debates with Judge Douglas, the Lincoln Douglas debates out in Illinois in '58. And one of my debates with him, those were 3-hour debates, by the way. The first person would speak for 90 minutes, then the next person would speak for 60 minutes, and then the first person would have a 30-minute wrap-up. And that used to be entertainment. That was a county fair. Everybody would show up. Hundreds and maybe thousands of people would show up to hear these debates. But at one point, Lincoln, Judge Douglas, speaking to me, said, called me two-faced. So when it was my turn to speak, I got up and I said, "Judge Douglas has called me two-faced." I said, "I'll leave it to my audiences. If I had two faces, would I use this one?" So I had no illusions about it. But I think to start, I'm going to give a brief review so that we're all on the common cons about some of the basic facts about me. And then we're going to play a song that helped get me elected first time, in 1860 as president. But as you know, I think if you study your history, I was born in 1809 in Kentucky, a small place, Sinking Spring Farm. I was there for 2 years. Then my family moved 10 miles away to Nob Hill Creek Farm. So, and if you go to Kentucky today, those two cabins are reenactment or replicas of those cabins exist, and it's worth a visit. And at 7, the family moved to southwest Indiana, just 20 miles up from the Ohio River, way in. And there's a farm with reenactors, and my sister's buried there, and my mother's buried there. And then when I was 21, my father moved to Illinois. But at this time, being 21, you were finally able to go off. I was able to go off on my own. Up until that age, everything that you earned belonged to your father. That was by law. And but at 21, I was off my own and ended up in New Salem, which is a restored village near Springfield. And was there through my 20s. And you'll see again that this is this.
Ready, sir, when you're ready,
Oh,
President?
terrific. Another about 20 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, terrific. You're going to enjoy this. But and you're going to see some of these places. But then we moved to Springfield, and of course that's where I spent my 30s and 40s. And 51, I was elected president. Came to Washington. So that's kind of my background. But can we play 3? This song helped get me elected. No, 1 minute before it starts. I like to do this when I'm dealing with school kids. They love this song. But I have to explain it a little bit before that I'm not being insulted in this song, because they call me a son of Kentucky, and you know now why they call, in the song, they call me a son of Kentucky. And then they call me a Hoosier. And why do they call me a Hoosier? Because I spent my teen years in Indiana. But then they call me a sucker. And that's not an insult. That's what they called people from Illinois at that time, a sucker. So the kids love that they can call me a sucker without insulting. That means I'm from Illinois.
Rock, the choice of the nation, our chieftains so brave and so true. We'll go for the great Reformation, for Lincoln and liberty too. We'll go for the son of Kentucky, the hero of Hoosiers and crew. Pride of the suckers so lucky, for Lincoln and liberty too. There with the banner so glorious, the star-spangled red, white, and blue. We'll fight till our banner's victorious, for Lincoln and liberty too. All you true friends of the nation, attend to humanity's fall. Aid in the slaves' liberation, and roll on the liberty ball. And roll on the liberty ball, and roll on the liberty ball.
Thank you. That did help get me elected. And of course, I was elected only because there were 4 candidates. That in 1860, the Democratic Party was divided between the North and the South, and then there was the Union Party, and then there was the Republican Party, which I represented. And I got less than 40% of the popular vote. But Electoral College, I took the majority of the Electoral College and became president. But it was only because of the Electoral College. It certainly wasn't a popular vote. We'll talk a little later about my next election. I did get 55% of the popular vote the second time, so I feel better about that. But that was also a fluke in some ways, and we'll talk about that. And by the way, I ask your indulgence if I forget anything or stumble. I am 205 years old, so you know, you gotta, take that into account. And usually when I'm meeting a group like this, I usually tell you all the men to remember to vote, and I hope you vote right, and even the women to go home and talk to their husbands and their fathers and their brothers to vote right. I'd ask the women for the vote, but they're not going to get it for another 60 years, so you couldn't do it. I never actually came to this part of the country before, to central New York. I had 5 visits. If you read the history books, you'll see that I visited your fine state 5 times. 4 of those times were the northern route, from the train from Cleveland to Buffalo to Utica to Syracuse, down at Albany, then down to New York. The fifth trip actually was during the war. I did come up the southern route from Washington. I came up to New York and then up to West Point. I wanted to meet with General Scott. I was having some trouble with my generals. General Scott was retired, but he was the most knowledgeable military man we had in the nation, and we were having some problems in the war. So I did come that way. So as I say, the history books would say that I did this 5 times. Truth of the matter is, I came here 6 times, but the 6th time was in a box. There was the funeral passage from back the same way that the inaugural train had come from Springfield, with the same stops at the same places. But instead of saying a few words, making a few remarks, they had a viewing of the open casket. So that, and back to Springfield. I'd like to talk a little bit about, as I say, I never did visit this area, but I did have a lot of acquaintances and friends and support here. There's 5 personalities that I'd like to just quickly mention, that 3 of them came from Homer. Some of you may have gone, you Homer residents, in 2009 they did quite a celebration of the bicentennial. Did some of you attend some of the events in 2009? Homer had quite a number of things. As a matter of fact, there was even a 1-act play where they put all of these 3 characters in the 1 act and in the White House meeting. So the 3 characters, Francis Carpenter, he was an artist. He actually spent time in the White House, 6 months living in the White House, while he was painting the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. And there's many stories told about the youngest Lincoln boy, Tad, played all kinds of tricks on him with his things and locking his stuff up and everything else. He wasn't particularly fond of young Tad. He made his life miserable. Later, he actually wrote a book about that experience. Then there was another fella by the name of William Stoddard. And actually, I learned about this person from an audience like this, but it was going back 15 years. I've been doing this for 20 years. And I was doing an old senior home, and a fellow in a wheelchair said, "Oh, I grew up, or I lived in the house that your secretary lived in." And all I knew at that time was my 2 secretaries came from Illinois, John Hay and John, can't even think of the last name. Nicolay, thank you. I said, I'm 205 years old, I made a promise. But I went home and did some research, and sure enough, there was another man from, living in Illinois at the time, a writer, and he was working in another department in Washington, but they needed somebody to answer the mail. The mail was coming in so heavy, as you can imagine, that they needed help. And so they hired William Stoddard as basically the 3rd. I'm told his granddaughter just passed away. Is that right? She lives here in town. He said one time, because he saw the mail that would come into the office, he said, "I am convinced that when somebody goes insane in this country, the first thing they do is write a letter to the president." Because he was on the recipient side of that. Here's somebody else that they learned a lot about in 2009 when I was working with the Homerites on this. But it confused me because I could never pin it down from a historian standpoint. I'm a frustrated historian and do a lot of reading and studying on this period. And the man by the name of Eli DeVoe. And they said he saved his life, that he was a private detective working with Pinkerton, who was the private detective who ultimately uncovered a plot about the Lincolns coming through Maryland to Washington, and so uncovered this plot. But I never could find this person's name. And it wasn't until recent research, very recent, that I came upon, that he used the name when he was undercover and he was joining some bands of Southern sympathizers in America, but he used the name Davis. So I read a lot about Davis, but I didn't know it was the same person from Homer. So anyway, so again, this is a constant learning process. There's a fellow named Petroleum V. Nasby. Petroleum, and he came from Virgil. Anybody know where Virgil is? Is that near here? And that was the pseudonym of a fellow by the name whose name was Dwight Ross Block. And this Petroleum Nasby wrote a column, a human column, and he would use the worst kind of language, English, grammar, slang, and misspelled words. But you get into a pattern, I've been reading some of this stuff, and you get a pattern, you can read it. Every word is misspelled and everything else, it's phonetically and everything else. And he was a northerner, what they called a copperhead, a Democrat in the North who was really sympathetic to the South. He felt that the North had no right to interfere with their decision or anything else. And he made Lincoln laugh. Lincoln would often go to the cabinet meetings with the latest column from Petroleum Nasby, and he loved it. And so another Homer, he said one time, if I could, if I had his talent, I'd gladly trade places with him. I mean, he just loved him. His cabinet or other people around him weren't always that appreciative when he would interrupt him and everything and have to tell him the latest. And there was another person here that I shook hands with, according to him, a number of times. And I should mention the name because it's a big name in central New York. And that's Ezra Cornell. Ezra Cornell, who wrote most of his life working for the various telegraph companies around the nation and being paid in telegraph stock, and was one of the poorest people in the nation until the Western Union decided to merge, and suddenly he became one of the wealthiest men in the nation, Ezra Cornell. And he was a farmer in Ithaca. He was born in Dryder, which is not too far from here, and he spent time in Syracuse. But then he also worked at a machine shop here in Homer for a while before discovering Ithaca. But his partner, when he donated the money and the land to start Cornell University, and he was involved in the legislature in Albany when the Land Grant Act, which Lincoln signed, came through. And he and a friend of his, who was born in Homer, New York, Andrew White, a young man, a young intellectual, and Ezra Cornell, they became friends. And so the first president of Cornell University was Andrew White from Homer, New York. So I do have a connection with your state. I'd like to spend just real quickly cover two of the early talks that I gave. One of the things I wrote that they found in one of the books that I had as a child, when I wrote this, I have no idea what age. Abraham Lincoln, his hand and pen, he will be good, but God knows when. I always love poetry, I guess I mean. But one of the movies where you're going to see a bit of, Henry Fonda played young Lincoln. The opening of that movie it shows this actual speech that was Lincoln's first political speech. 23 years old, he was living in New Salem, and here's the first speech. Fellow citizens, I presume you all know who I am. I am humble Abraham Lincoln. I've been solicited by many friends to become a candidate for the legislature. My politics are short and sweet, like the old woman's dance. I'm in favor of the National Bank, in favor of the internal improvement system, and a high protective tariff. These are my sentiments and political principles. If elected, I shall be thankful. If not, it will be all the same. And they have Henry Fonda showing that. If you go, you can find that movie on the internet, on YouTube, I think. and he actually gives that speech. That's the only political speech that I, as Abraham Lincoln, the only popular vote political race I ever lost. Right after I gave this speech, the Black Hawk War broke out. They were looking for men to join the militia. I joined the militia. I joined for a month. And one of the proudest accomplishments in my life is my troops elected me captain. So for a month I was captain of my group. At the end of that month, my tour was up, I re-upped, and I was a private. So my second month I was a private. So I was a captain and a private. But 2 months, but during that 2 months I couldn't campaign. And while I got most votes in my county, I hadn't been able to go outside the county, and so I lost that election. But then I won the next 4 state legislature elections, and I also ran for Congress and served a term in Congress and won that. And of course I won 2 presidencies. So I won every popular vote election that I've ever been in except the first one. But after winning my first presidency, let me share one other speech that I shared at the train depot in Springfield to my neighbors and friends in Springfield, because I've lived there much of my adult life. It's still there, by the way. Anybody here been to the Lincoln Museum out in Springfield? Just a couple of you, okay. It's worth visiting. And if you go to Springfield, it's also nice to go 20 miles away to New Salem, the restored village. But here's my remarks at the train station. My friends, no one not in my situation can appreciate my feeling of sadness at this parting. To this place and the kindness of these people I owe everything. Here I have lived a quarter of a century and have passed from a young to an old man. Here my children have been born and one is buried. I now leave, not knowing when or whether I ever may return, for the task before me greater than that which rested upon Washington. Without the assistance of that divine being, whoever attended him, I cannot succeed. With that assistance, I cannot fail. Trusting in him who can go with me and remain with you and be everywhere for good, let us confidently hope that all will yet be well. To his care commending you, as I hope in your prayers you will commend me, I bid you an affectionate farewell. So that was his farewell speech, and the next time you'd see that station, of course, it would be in a box. Brought home with his son Willie, who also died in Washington, D.C. The other group that I have to pay tribute to when I'm in Central New York is the New York State Volunteers. 76 came from Cortland. 76 volunteers came from Cortland, from all the towns surrounding too. But they served almost the entire war. They served Gettysburg, and they served in a number of other places. One of the things that's interesting that I found from reading some of the letters from the people who served with the 76 during the war, from Cortland County and the environment, was something that was impressive. When the war started, of course, it's, oh, by the way, this is the celebration of that day. It was on this date, in 1861, that Fort Sumter was fired on. Did you know that? April 12th. So we're meeting today on the celebration of that infamous act. But anyway, I knew that I had to, as president, to work or to try to bring back into the family these seceding states that I had to tread lightly, but there were some things I had to enforce. I couldn't let Maryland go join the Confederacy. I had Virginia on one side of Washington, D.C. The north was Maryland. We just couldn't do that. So we played around with the habeas corpus, the right to free trial, and a few other things in Maryland and other places, just to help us win the war. But we also let any other laws that were on the books continue. And one of them was the Fugitive Slave Act. I was never in favor of that, but by that law, it was on the books, it was a national law, it said that any escaped slave that came north could be tracked down by the bounty hunters or their owner and sent back. In the early part of the war, that happened. That was the law, and so, but I read about the 76th Regiment volunteers from Cortland County. They were going through Maryland, and a couple black men, escaped slaves, they joined their camp. They gave them uniforms, parts of uniforms, and everything, and they were marching through one of these small towns, and a couple of bounty hunters saw these men marching with the Yankees, who were all white soldiers at that time. And they said, they're ours, so they belong to us. And the captain said, you're welcome to them. You want to take them from these guys? You know, these men weren't going to give them up. And so that was the beginning of the end. And it was a little bit after that when other generals decided that what in fact that these men, these escaped slaves, were contraband. They called them contraband because when they were with the Confederate Army, they were put to work building things for the Confederate Army, and embankments and everything else. So that ended that. But it was the regiment from this group that did such a great job early on defending freed slaves. Always made me proud. People ask me how I got into this. All my alter ego got into this business, and actually, Fred Antel grew up in this area. Went to school with a couple of people here in the room. Went to St. Mary's. My father was connected with Jerky's Bread in Homer, New York. So his office was in Homer, and our home was in Cortland. And then we moved out to Fabius area, and where I grew up. But I lived in Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York. In the 80s, came back to work at Cornell University. After retiring from Cornell University, grandkids began to invite you as grandparents to come in and read to the kids in class. And so I said, well, yeah, I was looking around for books to read. I always liked Lincoln, so I got books about Lincoln and go in and read to the kids. Then I figured out that, well, I'm about his size, about as handsome, and I said, well, no, I just decided that, so I got the fake beard and the Hollywood outfit, and the kids loved it. They really thrived on it. But then I began to hear from adult audiences. And they said, oh, we understand you do Lincoln, would you come and do Lincoln with us? And that's when I decided I had to get serious about this. So I called the wardrobe mistress at the Ithaca College Theater Department. I said, if you're going to put on a play about Lincoln, where would you costume him? And she said, well, it depends on the budget. I said, I don't care about the budget, tell me where. So the authentic clothes and of course, grow the beard. And of course, it had to diet. I think I've lost my mole here. I have a mole here. Yes, it fell off. One of my times when I was doing at a grade school, and I had wrapped up 3 or 4 or 5 classes, and the kids love it. You know they need it when you go down the hall and they look at you and say, hey, George. And I said, no, I'm one of those guys. So I need that. But I think I was just wrapping up 3 or 4 or 5 classes, and that was 4th grade, and the kids love it. I give them a penny as my calling card, and I said, this is my calling card, and I tell them about how the penny came about. So they end up knowing more about the penny than the advanced student. And I tell them I could give them a dirty old wrinkled up greenback with my face on it, but they'd much rather have the penny. It's amazing, they don't have to be very old before they say, no, we'll take the... Mrs. Lincoln didn't raise any dumb kids. They get pennies. But Anyway, this little girl, she said, "Can I touch your mole?" And I said, "You can do better than that. You can have it." And I took it. She jumped about 6 feet. But later, when the teacher sent me a thank you card and with all their signatures and things, they saw a name and said, "Your friend, the mole girl." But another positive kind of a feedback that I had was I was doing a program with a bunch of young elementary school kids up in Andover, Mass. And they were all around in chairs, and we had a lot of fun. I tell them anecdotes and jokes and pranks that Lincoln played as a young boy and things like that. And the next day I got a call from the teacher, and she said, "I have to tell you what happened last night." She said, at home the previous evening, she had gotten a call from the mother of one of the little girls in this class. And apparently this little girl, I didn't know it, of course, when I'm working with the kids, but she is what I guess they call a voluntary mute. She can speak, she chooses not to. She chose not to, and of course it concerned her parents and their school and everything else. But they said the woman was in tears. She was crying. She said, whatever her name was, came home and couldn't stop talking about that she had met Mr. Lincoln. She had a penny and everything else, and she kept talking about it. So that's very moving. And one final adult kind of a feedback session I had. I was doing a Lincoln emceeing a big Lincoln Day dinner one time, and the guest speaker was the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. And it was a very, very big affair, and lots of people. And he was working the room, shaking hands with everybody, and he met my wife at one time, and she pointed up on the stage and said, "I'm Mrs. Lincoln." He says, "I hope you don't go crazy like the other one." And ultimately, then he was sitting there. It was Rudy Giuliani, Mayor Giuliani, and I'm at the lectern to introduce him. And I said, "Welcome, sir." I said, "You represent one of my favorite cities. My hero, George Washington, was sworn in there and gave his farewell address there." So I said, "That makes it special for me." But also, one time I gave a speech down there that some people say won me the election. Tell me, sir, is the Cooper Union, the Cooper Institute still there? And he's sitting in his chair and he bellows out, he says, "Mr. President, it's not only still there, I was there last week and they still talk about your speech." Politicians, you gotta love them, right? But I think it may be time to get a wonderful treat. When I was here talking about this presentation, I happened to be lucky enough to have a young man, Tyler over here, who happened to be here, and I said, I like to play music and at my presentations, and I said there's a number of wonderful, wonderful Hollywood movies about Lincoln that would be terrific if we just could, Mr. Lincoln himself was very technical. He, as I told you earlier, he loved to fool around with gadgets, and he has an own patent. His alter ego, boom, helpless. Around technophobe, I guess is what we're called. And so I said to this young man, I said, "Boy, there's some wonderful, Raymond Massey played him, Henry Fonda played him, Gregory Peck played him, and then the latest movie, which is just terrific, Walter Houston played him in 1930. I said, there's wonderful, if we could just do it." And he said, "Yeah, we can do that." And I didn't hear anything. And I said, "Yeah." Young man took the ball and ran with it, and he and some of his buddies, but it's terrific. You're going to, it's 11 minutes long. You're going to see, the other thing to know, I told you about where Lincoln lived at the various times of his life, but what about the beard? You're going to see an opening clip, I think Raymond Massey is the opening clip, and you're going to see him in two things, one without the beard and one with the beard. When was the beard? Lincoln was elected without the beard. November of 1861 election, and he did that. Back in those days, the president was sworn in March, and early in March. And so when Lincoln left for Washington on the inaugural train, the same train that ended up, the funeral train coming back, with frequent stops and a few remarks at each stop. But the beard was there. So Lincoln only had the beard the last 4.5 years of his life. But so when you look at this movie, you can determine was it before the election or after the election when you see Lincoln without beard or with beard. And anything else? Oh yes. Let's see. You're going to see basically clips of 4 movies. You're going to see the 1930 movie, one of the first sound movies. Walter Houston played Lincoln. They cover from his birth in Kentucky and then right up to the Ford Theater incident. And the adult is Walter Houston. D.W. Griffith is the director, famous director. This is not Lincoln's first time on the Hollywood screen. In 1915, they did a silent movie called The Birth of the Nation, and Lincoln was portrayed in that. Very historically interesting movie. Historically accurate in one way, but offensive in many other ways. It really is, that was the nation. But that was a silent movie. Then 1930, Walter Houston, we're going to see. That's going to be the opening scene, right, with General Grant. General Grant, who and loved his cigars. And then you're going to see a 1939 movie, Henry Fonda playing young Lincoln. This would all been in New Salem. And then you're going to see the 1940 movie. It's called Lincoln in Illinois. And this had been a play. Sherwood Anderson wrote the play. It had been on Broadway. Raymond Madison played the part. But you're going to see a very good clip of the Lincoln-Douglas debates, these 7 debates. Were very, very important to Lincoln because they helped give him national visibility. Douglas was a well-known personality, but Lincoln was not until after these debates were published. And then you're going to, actually at one point you're going to see a real quick clip of Gregory Peck as Lincoln. This was from 1982 miniseries on television, The Blue and the Gray. Many of these are available to watch on the internet right now. And anything else? And we're going to wrap up with a very moving Civil War song. But that's about it, right?
Yeah, that's about it.
Okay, thank you. And here, we save your applause, but this young man and his cohorts, see what they did. Go ahead.
This country with its institutions belongs to the people who inhabit it. We gained democracy, and there is now doubt whether it is fit to survive.
Should I assume command, there would be no interference?
None. I promise you that.
Grant?
Lieutenant General is the highest army command the President can bestow. We haven't had one since General Washington. He was a fair sort of a soldier, too. Lieutenant General Grant, my orders are win the war.
I'll do my best, Mr. President.
I know you will.
Unfortunately, many of us have failed to recognize a great Confederate soldier,
Lee.
On the other hand, we have thus far failed to take advantage of a great northern soldier. I hope I am not too late in collecting the error.
Well, Mr. President, I think it only fair to warn you. Many people don't approve of me.
None of me. But rest assured, there will be no interference, no intrusion. My wife. All right, Mary.
Wait and see. Where did all the smoke come from?
Mary, meet General Grant, Mrs. Lincoln.
Pleasure indeed to meet the First Lady of the land.
Thank you. I want to talk to you, Miss
But
Lincoln.
Mary,
I want to talk to you about discharging some of the service in this house. Here, with all this smoke. Why don't you open the window? I can't say this. Pardon me, General. I'll have to talk to you later.
Get away, Lincoln. We're coming through.
All joking aside, let's look at this matter from my side. Well, you all know I'm just a fresh lawyer trying to get ahead. But some of you boys act like you want to do me out of my first clients. Boy, I'm not saying you fellas are not right. Maybe these boys do deserve to hang. But with me handling their case, don't look like you'll have much to worry about on that score. All I'm asking is to have it done with some legal pomp and show.
That's all right. That's totally right. How about our side of it? We've gone to a heap of trouble not to have at least one hanging.
Sure you have, Mac. And if these boys had more than one life, I'd say go ahead. Maybe a little hanging mightn't do them any harm. But the sort of hanging you boys would give them would be so permanent. Trouble is, when men start taking the law into their own hands, just as apt to know the confusion and fun to start hanging somebody who's not a murderer as somebody who is. And the next thing you know, they're hanging one another just for fun. Till it gets to a place a man can't pass a tree or look at a rope without feeling uneasy. We seem to lose our heads in times like this. We do things together that we'd be mighty ashamed to do by ourselves.
Mr. Lincoln harps constantly on this subject of equality. He repeats over and over the argument used by Lovejoy and other abolitionists, to wit, that the Declaration of Independence, having declared all men free and equal by divine law, thus Negro equality, is an inalienable right. Contrary to this stands the verdict of the Supreme Court in the case of Dred Scott. Mr. Lincoln is a lawyer, and I presume, therefore, that he knows that when he seeks to destroy public confidence in the integrity, the inviolability of the Supreme Court, he is preaching revolution. He asks me to state my opinion of the Dred Scott decision, and I answer him unequivocally by saying I take the decisions of the Supreme Court to be the law of the land, and I intend to obey them as such. Now will I be swayed from that position by all the ranting of all the fanatics who preach racial equality, who would ask us to vote, eat, sleep, and marry with Negroes. And I say further, let each state mind its own business and leave its neighbors alone. If we'll stand on that principle, then Mr. Lincoln will find that this great republic can exist, forever divided into free and slave states, and we can go on, as we have done, increasing in wealth, in population, in power, until we shall become the admiration and the terror of the world.
yell. The empty-headed idiot's yelling at empty words. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He never did.
You upset me, Fred.
Mr. Abraham Lincoln.
Judge Douglas has paid tribute to my skill with the dagger. I thank you for that, but I must admit that he can do more with that weapon than I can. He can keep 10 daggers flashing in the air at the same time. Fortunately, he's so good at it that none of the knives ever falls and hurts anyone. Now, you've heard the judge make allusion to those who advocate voting and eating and marrying and sleeping with Negroes. Whether he meant me specifically, I do not know. If he did, I can only say that just because I do not want a colored woman for a slave, I do not necessarily want her for a wife. I do not need to have her for either. I can just leave her alone. In some respects, she is certainly not my equal any more than I am the judge's equal in some respects. But in her natural right to eat the bread she earns with her own hands without asking leave of somebody else, she is my equal and the equal of all others.
Euclid's first common notion is this: things which are equal to the same thing are equal to each other. That's a rule of mathematical reasoning. It's true because it works. Has done and always will do. In his book, Euclid says this is self-evident. You see, there it is, even in that 2,000-year-old book of mechanical law. It is a self-evident truth that things which are equal to the same thing are equal to each other.
Been tenting tonight on the old campground. Bring us a song to cheer our weary hearts, a song of hope. Friends we love so dear. Many are the hearts that are weary tonight, wishing for the war to cease. Many are the hearts looking for the right to see the dawn of peace. Tenting tonight, tenting on the old campground. We've been fighting today on the old campground. Many are lying here. Some are dead, some are dying. Many are many are the hearts that are weary tonight.
This is the artist who put it together. I hadn't already given out Lieutenant Generals. I think I would appoint you that. But Grant has it. Sorry about that. Anyway, thank you. I want to kind of wrap up because I know that some of the bus tour will leave. So just thank you very much. It was terrific. I'm going to be here as long as you want with questions. So there's questions and answers, we can take it. But I just want to give those who have to leave a chance to leave. The second the second election. I fully expected to lose that second election, and as I say, I won the first one close. I didn't, as I said, less than 40% of the popular vote. But the second one, I had one opponent, one main opponent, McClellan, who was running on a Democrat. And he was a beloved general. He didn't like to fight. I once called his army McClellan's bodyguards. You know, I mean, he didn't fight, but he trained well, and he was respected and liked by most of his troops. And he was running against me. And so, and the war was very, very unpopular. We had there was much blood shedding and many defeats. And I fully expected in '64, the second election, that we were going to lose. And one of McClellan's platform was that he would make immediate peace with the South. People wanted the war over. But what won the war was, interesting enough, it was the soldiers. We learned from the first campaign. We put a policy that the soldiers could go home to vote. And it was basically the soldiers' vote. They had fought this war. They weren't crazy about it. They wouldn't, but they did not want it just suddenly over and conceded everything that was they've been fighting for, given up. So and the other factor that won the war was, or swayed the popular opinion, was General Sherman's announcing that he had taken Atlanta. And once that happened, we didn't know where he was. He didn't communicate with us. Right? That's an inside joke. He disappeared. We knew he was marching someplace down there, but we didn't know where. And he was raising hell in Georgia and later in the Carolinas, and took Atlanta. And that victory helped sway. So the second election, I did win with 55% of the popular vote. I'm going to wrap up with some final remarks from Lincoln, and that is what many people now say is the best speech. That's the second inaugural speech. For years, it was the Gettysburg Address. Many of us of a certain age grew up memorizing the Gettysburg Address. And Gettysburg Address is poetry, but the second inaugural is very moving. It's almost like a sermon. The war was given in March, early in March. April 9th, the following month, about 5 weeks later, Lee surrendered. And on the 15th, of course, the 14th, Lincoln was shot at Fort Theater. So that March and that April of '65 was pretty important. But Lincoln saw the challenge of bringing all of the warring states back into the family. And so this speech addresses that whole issue of one coming together again. And it would be very interesting, studying out of character now, speaking as a citizen of the nation. What an interesting thing it would have been if Lincoln had lived and the whole Reconstruction had been done differently and less punitively as was done in the South. Embittering, well, they still call the war Northern aggression when you go down south. You know? I was in New Orleans a little bit ago, and I was on a tour, and we passed a YMCA, and the tour guide said, "You know what that is?" And I said, "Oh, the Yankees may come again." Here's the final few sentences of his second inaugural. "Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away, Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said. The judgment of the land are true. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous. Altogether, with malice towards none, with charity for all, with fairness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Do we end up with the number 9? I gave a presentation at Kendall a number of times. Kendall's a retirement community in Connecticut. And the first time I did it, they said people are very particular about the time they leave, you know, we'll finish it right on this time, whatever the time they told me. And I did. I finished right on time. I started playing this tune. Nobody left. They all sat there and sang. Feel free to keep it up. Thank you very much, folks. If you have any questions at all, I'll be happy to try to answer them, or I'm a pretty good storyteller, so I can tell you something.
What was your patent?